So there are a number of myths that people buy into when it comes to estate planning. Number one, I hear it all the time. Francine, I don't need to have an estate plan. I'm not rich. Only rich people need to have an estate plan. Well, that is as far from the truth as I can imagine anything is. And you know why? Because estate planning is not just about money, it's about peace of mind. It's about you knowing exactly what happens with even your limited assets when you pass away or when you become incapacitated. And while you may not become incapacitated, it's always good to plan for that. So the last thing you want is for your assets, your hard earned assets, to go into the hands of someone that you really don't like. That's one thing. So that's a crazy myth. Only the rich deserve to have estate planning. Another myth is, well, my spouse is going to get everything, so I don't have to worry about it. They get everything. Well, while that might be true, your spouse, depending upon the circumstances, might actually get everything you own. What if you've got minor children? Don't assume that the courts are just going to give it all to your spouse. No, part of that is going to go to your minor kids. And even if you have grown kids, depending upon the facts of the situation, some of those grown kids might also think they have a claim to the assets that you have created. Another thing, what if you purchased a piece of property or you had some asset where you owned it as a joint owner with right of survivorship with someone else? Let's say that someone else was a close friend or even a former spouse. Let's suppose you owned a house with a former spouse and you put that former spouse on the deed, joint tenants with right of survivorship. Well, what that means is when you pass, that house is not going to go into a will or a trust. It's going to go directly into the hands of your former spouse. Why? Because joint tenant with right of survivorship means as soon as you pass, it bypasses all of those vehicles like wills and trusts and immediately goes to the other person who's on that deed. So that's one thing. Don't assume automatically that your spouse is going to inherit everything. And the other myth I often hear is, well, wills are private, aren't they? And actually, they don't even say, aren't they? People just say a will is a private document. That is not true. Trust, as long as a trust is drafted properly and all the assets that have gone into that trust are properly titled, the trust is private, but not a will. Almost always, wills must be probated. And if they're probated, they must be in the public. Public access must be available. Okay, common myths, be aware of them.